The void was quiet. The battlefield, if one could even call it that anymore, was a graveyard of shattered hulls and dying embers. Humanity's fleets had been wiped out. The United Terran Defense Force was gone. The few surviving colonies were being hunted down one by one. The war was over. At least that's what the Karath Dominion believed. Admiral Zerl of the Karath stood aboard his flagship, the Dominance unchallenged, watching the debris drift aimlessly. His fleet had suffered minimal losses. The humans had fought desperately, but they were outmatched from the beginning. Primitive engines, outdated shielding, laughable firepower. Their technology was a century behind Karath standards. Victory had been inevitable. "Begin recovery operations," Isle commanded. "Salvage anything of value. The rest is space dust." The crew of insectoid officers chirped and clicked in agreement. The war was won. Humanity was extinct in all but name. Then the alarm sounded. A pulse rippled through subspace, an energy signature unlike anything Zerl had ever seen. The sensors on the Dominance unchallenged shrieked warnings in a dozen different frequencies. Something was coming. Something big. Earl turned sharply to his second-in-command, Commander Jivik. "What was that?" Jivik's mandibles quivered as he analyzed the readings. His eyes, usually calm, were now wide with disbelief. "A ship," Jivik said, his voice unsteady. "A human warship." Silence fell over the bridge. Impossible. There were no human ships left. Zerl himself had seen their last fleets reduced to cinders. "Identify it," Isle barked. Jivik worked furiously, his clawed hands dancing over the controls. More alarms flared. Data flooded the screens. And then, the unknown ship emerged from the void. It was massive, larger than anything the humans had ever fielded before. Its hull was a deep, obsidian black, reflecting almost no light. Scars from ancient battles marred its surface, but its sheer presence radiated something terrifying, something raw. A name burned across its side in human script. The translation came instantly. UTS Vengeance. Zerl had never heard of such a ship. It wasn't in any human fleet reports. It had no record in Dominion intelligence. And yet it was here. "Impossible," he whispered. Then the warship hailed them. A human voice crackled through the comms, deep, cold. "Karath Dominion Fleet, this is Admiral Elias Graves of the United Terran ship Vengeance. You have committed genocide against the human race. For that, there will be no negotiations, no surrender, no mercy." Zerl felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Then the Vengeance opened fire. The first shot wasn't a warning. A massive beam of crimson energy lanced across the void, cutting through space like the wrath of a dying god. The lead Karath battleship, a vessel that had once annihilated entire human colonies with ease, was reduced to vapor in a heartbeat. No shields, no evasive maneuvers, just gone. The Karath fleet reeled in shock. Zerl's mandibles clicked frantically as he processed what had just happened. That was impossible. Human weapons weren't supposed to be this powerful. Their ships had never displayed anything close to this level of firepower. And yet, the Vengeance had just erased a Dominion warship with a single blast. "Fire! All ships, fire!" Zerl roared, his voice betraying his panic. The Karath warfleet obeyed. A storm of plasma, railgun rounds, and torpedoes streaked through space, converging on the lone human warship. The Vengeance did not evade. It did not flinch. Instead, its shields absorbed everything. A monstrous energy field glowing a sickly red flared to life around the ship. The Dominion's most advanced weaponry simply dissolved upon impact. And then the Vengeance struck back. Its hull split open in sections, revealing rows upon rows of missile silos and railgun arrays that dwarfed anything the Dominion had ever seen. The sky burned as the ship unleashed its payload. Hundreds of Karath warships were caught in the inferno. Some were shredded by hypervelocity projectiles that punched through their hulls like paper. Others were torn apart by nuclear-tipped torpedoes detonating in their midst. The destruction was total. On the bridge of the Dominance unchallenged, Zerl watched as a third of his fleet vanished in seconds. This isn't possible, Javik stammered, his claws shaking over his console. Humanity can't have this technology. They were primitive. We broke them. Zerl didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the screen, watching death unfold before his eyes. This wasn't just a warship. It was a monstrosity. The Vengeance moved with the slow, methodical precision of a predator that knew it was the apex of the battlefield. The way it glided through the wreckage, its black hull barely illuminated by the fires of its destruction, sent a deep, primal terror through the Karath admiral. "Pull back," Zerl whispered. Javik turned to him in shock. "Admiral, pull back!" Zerl shrieked. It was too late. The Vengeance had already locked onto the Dominance unchallenged. Admiral Graves' voice returned to the comms. This time, there was no emotion, no fury, just cold, merciless judgment. "You exterminated billions of my people. I will return the favor." The last thing Zyril saw was the bright flash of the Vengeance's main cannon firing. And then, the Karath flagship, along with its admiral, was nothing but debris. The battle was over before it had even begun. But the war? The war was just getting started. The battlefield was silent. Where once there had been a Karath fleet 100 strong, now only debris remained, twisted metal, shattered hulls, and the burning remnants of ships that had ruled the void for decades. And at the heart of it all, drifting like a spectre of vengeance, was humanity's last warship. Aboard the Vengeance, Admiral Elias Graves stood in the dim glow of his bridge, watching the aftermath unfold on the view screen. His face was expressionless, carved from years of war, grief, and now something colder. The Karath Dominion had thought humanity finished, thought they could wipe Earth and her colonies from existence and move on unchallenged. They had made a fatal mistake. Because humanity had always been at its most dangerous when backed into a corner. "Admiral," came the voice of his tactical officer, Commander Layla Briggs. "Enemy fleet is gone. Sensors indicate no survivors." Graves didn't look away from the screen. His grip tightened on the edge of his console. "That's not enough?" Briggs hesitated. "Sir." Graves finally turned, his steel-grey eyes locked onto hers. "I want every remaining Karath distress signal jammed. I want wreckage retrieval drones launched. We take whatever tech we can and wipe every trace of our presence. No witnesses, no survivors." A chill ran through the bridge crew. The old Elias Graves, the one who had once believed in rules, in diplomacy, in war with limits, had died with Earth. Now there was only vengeance. Briggs nodded sharply, not daring to question him. "Aye, sir." Across the bridge, Chief Engineer Torres leaned against his console, exhaling slowly. "I gotta ask, Admiral," he said carefully. "Where the hell did this ship even come from?" The Vengeance wasn't like anything Earth had ever built. It was too advanced, too powerful. More firepower than the entire Terran Navy had possessed at its peak. Graves didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered to the insignia burned into the far wall, a faded symbol of the old Earth Defense Initiative, a black project so classified that even the highest-ranking admirals had whispered about it like a ghost story, a final failsafe, a warship designed in secret, hidden away in deep space for one purpose only: extinction-level retaliation. The Karath had wiped out Earth, believing they had finished the war. They had only started it. Graves finally spoke, his voice low and unreadable. "This ship was a contingency," he said, "a failsafe in case the worst happened." Torres exhaled. "Well, the worst sure as hell happened." "And now?" Briggs asked, her expression unreadable. "What's next?" Graves stepped forward, staring out at the ruins of the Karath fleet. His next words were spoken not just to his crew, but to the void itself. "Now," he said, "we burn the Dominion to the ground." Back aboard the Vengeance, Graves stood at the helm, watching as the ship turned toward its next target. The Dominion thought it had won. It had no idea what was coming. "Set course," Graves ordered. "Next colony, next fleet, next warlord." The stars stretched before them, and the Vengeance moved forward like a storm waiting to break. It had only just begun. The Vengeance drifted through the void like a phantom, silent and unrelenting. The ship's hull, black as deep space, seemed to absorb light itself. No beacon, no identification signal, no trace of warmth or mercy. It was not a warship. It was an executioner. Admiral Graves stood at the command console, his hands folded behind his back as he watched the next target loom into view on the main screen. A Karath supply station, orbiting a barren world. This wasn't a military base. This wasn't a war fleet. This was logistics, the fragile backbone of the Karath Dominion's war machine. A strike here would starve their fleets, would leave entire battle groups stranded in the void, unable to refuel or resupply. "Commander Briggs," Graves said, his voice calm but cold. "Do we have visual on enemy defenses?" Briggs studied the readings, her expression tightening. "Minimal. A few defensive turrets, 2 light escort frigates. They weren't expecting anything heavier than raiders." Graves nodded. Of course they weren't. Why would they? The humans were supposed to be extinct. The Dominion had believed it had already won. That was their mistake. "Begin approach," Graves ordered. Torres let out a slow exhale. "Sir, do we give them a chance to surrender?" Graves' jaw tensed. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, something buried, something that used to be there before Earth burned. Then it was gone. "No," he said. Torres swallowed and gave a short nod, turning away. Briggs issued the firing sequence. Vengeance moved into position. The main cannon glowed an eerie crimson, gathering energy, the ship's very structure humming with barely restrained power. On the station below, alarms would be blaring. Scrambling voices would be calling for reinforcements. It wouldn't matter. The Vengeance fired. A single shot, and the supply station was vaporized. Gone. Just like that. The 2 Karath frigates broke formation, trying to flee, trying to run for their lives. Briggs smirked. "Cowards!" Graves barely reacted. "Eliminate them!" The ship's secondary batteries came alive. Plasma rounds, railgun slugs, and micro-missiles ripped through the escaping frigates, reducing them to shredded husks in seconds. There were no distress calls, no survivors, no mercy. Graves exhaled slowly, his grip loosening just slightly. Another cut to the Dominion's throat. Another step closer to payback. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not yet. "Target eliminated," Briggs confirmed. "Orders, sir." Graves turned away from the wreckage on the screen, already thinking ahead. Already planning. The Vengeance was powerful, but it was just one ship, and there was still an entire empire to burn. "Set course for the next Karath forward base," he said. "We keep moving." The crew obeyed. The stars shifted as the Vengeance prepared for its next jump. They weren't just fighting a war. They were ending it. Meanwhile, deep in Karath space, Supreme Warlord Vroth stood at the center of the Dominion High Command, his claws digging into the war table. The 9th Fleet was gone. A Terran warship had wiped them out. That alone had been an impossibility. But now, 3 supply stations had gone dark. Hundreds of ships had vanished without a trace. A ghost was moving through Dominion territory. A ghost called Vengeance. A low growl rumbled from Vroth's throat. "What do we know?" A tactical officer clicked nervously, adjusting the holographic display. "We have managed to analyze battle data from the last engagement. The human warship. It is unlike anything we have ever encountered. It possesses advanced shielding, high-yield weaponry, and... The officer hesitated. Vroth's eyes narrowed. "And what?" The officer twitched. "It moves like it knows us, like it understands our weaknesses. Every strike has been surgical, targeting supply lines, key installations, crippling us before we can respond." Vroth's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Then find it." The officer swallowed. We have tried, Warlord, but..." Vroth slammed his fist against the table, his patience snapping. "But what?" The room fell silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the officer said, "It never leaves a trace." A stillness settled over the chamber. A warship that could not be tracked. That never left survivors. That had single-handedly done more damage to the Dominion in a matter of weeks than the entire Terran fleet had in years. Vroth's claws tightened. "This ends now," he growled. "Summon the Red Armada." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The Red Armada was the elite fleet of the Dominion. Thousands of warships, hardened veterans, weapons that could reduce entire planets to rubble. If a single human ship was going to make war on the Dominion, then the Dominion would drown it in fire and blood. Back aboard the Vengeance, Admiral Graves watched the next target appear on the screen. Another Dominion base, another strike to be made. He should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt nothing, because he knew what was coming. The Karath weren't going to run anymore. They were going to fight. Good. Graves exhaled, stepping forward. Prepare for battle. The Vengeance surged forward. The war was about to reach its climax, and he would not stop until the Karath were nothing but ash. The Vengeance drifted through the void, silent and patient, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But this time, it would not be ambushing isolated targets. This time, the hunters were coming for it. Admiral Elias Graves stood at the center of the bridge, eyes locked on the glowing holomap. The Karath had finally responded, and they had not come lightly. The Red Armada. Briggs murmured, staring at the tactical display. They brought everything. Everything was an understatement. The fleet before them was a wall of warships. Thousands of Dominion vessels, each one bristling with weapons, each one carrying hardened veterans of war. Graves had known this was inevitable. One ship, no matter how advanced, could only slip through the cracks for so long. And now, the Dominion had decided to snuff out the last ember of humanity once and for all. A voice crackled through the comms, deep, guttural, filled with rage and anticipation. "Terran warship, I am Supreme Warlord Vroth of the Karath Dominion. Your campaign of cowardly ambushes ends today." Graves exhaled slowly. They called it cowardice because they had never been on the receiving end of it. He pressed a button on the console. "I'm listening." Vroth's voice rumbled with amusement. "Do you think you have a choice?" The fleet before them began to spread out, forming a massive kill box, ensuring there would be no escape routes, no blind spots, nowhere to run. They weren't just here to destroy him. They were here to make an example. Graves glanced at his crew. Briggs' hands were steady on her controls. Torres was muttering under his breath, running last-minute diagnostics on the ship's power core. They weren't afraid. They knew what was coming, and they had already made their peace with it. Graves turned back to the comms. "I have one question, Supreme Warlord." Vroth sneered. "Make it your last." Graves leaned forward. "How many of your ships are you willing to lose before I go down?" Silence. Then the Vengeance fired first. A crimson beam ripped through the void, obliterating the lead Karath battleship before it even had a chance to react. And just like that, the final battle had begun. The Vengeance moved like a force of nature, weaving through the Karath formation with terrifying precision. Every shot counted, every move devastated. A carrier exploded in a fiery detonation. A dreadnought's bridge was punched clean through by a railgun barrage. Two cruisers collided, both suffering catastrophic damage as they tried to evade the wrath of the last Terran warship. But the Red Armada was vast. For every ship Graves destroyed, dozens more closed in. Flashes of enemy fire streaked across the hull. Shields flared and strained, warning alarms blaring in the background. "We're losing power on the lower decks," Torres shouted. "Keep firing." Graves ordered. Briggs' hands were blurs over the controls. The ship's AI-assisted targeting systems worked overtime, predicting enemy movements before they even happened. A Karath warship tried to flank them. It was reduced to slag before it could fire a shot. But no matter how many they killed, more took their place. Then, a direct hit. The bridge shook violently. Sparks erupted from shattered consoles. Flames licked at the edges of the control stations. "Shields at 15%! Briggs shouted, gripping the console. Graves gritted his teeth. The Vengeance had done the impossible. It had wiped out fleets, destroyed colonies, crippled the Dominion's supply lines. But it was one ship, and even vengeance had its limits. The Red Armada was closing in for the final blow. Vroth's voice returned, gloating. "You fought well, human, but in the end you are just one man, one ship, and you will burn like the rest of your kind." Graves exhaled. He should have felt fear. He should have felt rage. Instead, he felt relief. He looked around at his crew, each one battered but unbroken. They had done what no one thought possible. They had made the Karath afraid. And now they would make sure the Dominion never forgot them. Graves turned to Briggs. "Prepare the final charge." Her eyes widened. "Sir?" Graves stared at the largest Karath battleship in the center of the fleet, the Dominion's flagship, the core of their command structure. Vroth's throne. If they couldn't escape, then they would make damn sure the Dominion paid the price. Briggs hesitated only a second before nodding. "Aye, sir." Torres's voice was strained. "Sir, if we overload the core, we won't have time to eject?" Graves met his gaze. "I know." A deep silence settled over the bridge. No one objected, because they had all known from the moment this war began that none of them were making it out alive. Briggs exhaled sharply, steadying herself. Then she activated the sequence. The Vengeance lurched forward, engines burning at full power, ripping through the battlefield toward the enemy flagship. Vroth's voice snapped over the comms, filled with panic. "Stop them!" Too late. The Vengeance, humanity's last warship, the final shadow of a fallen race, smashed into the Karath flagship at full speed and detonated. The explosion was blinding. The shockwave ripped through the battlefield, vaporizing everything in its path. When the light faded, the Dominion flagship was gone. And so was the Vengeance. The Karath Dominion never recovered. The loss of their warlord shattered their leadership. The destruction of the Red Armada left them vulnerable. The war they had waged with such arrogance ended in their ruin. They had thought themselves invincible. But now whispers spread across the galaxy of a single human warship, a ship that had defied an empire, a ship that had turned the tide of a lost war, a ship that had become legend. And even in death, one truth remained. Vengeance had been delivered, and the stars would never forget.